Even without picking up a paintbrush, Hans Hofmann had a profound influence on modern art as a teacher to some of the 20th century greats. But as the Peabody Essex Museum reveals in a new show, he was in a class all his own. To artist Hans Hofmann, process was as important as painting. And he's not just using a brush.
No, on this one, I think you can see a palette knife, you can see brush. He may have squeezed pigment directly onto the canvas. Once in a while we find fingerprints.
This is Hofmann's Indian Summer, painted when he was 79, when he was in the midst of an artistic rebirth.
This is an amazing landscape or mindscape of what might be fall colors, this bright orange, intense blue.
In fact, many of the works in this Peabody Essex Museum show, where we find Hofmann exploring the nature of abstraction, were completed toward the end of his life, says curator Lucinda Barnes.
All he did was paint. And the paintings that we're sitting amongst, these are paintings that he made in his 80s. And there's an enormous scale to them. There's enormous energy.
Hofmann was born in Germany in 1880. In Europe, he was a painter and teacher. He was also part of an artistic circle that included Picasso and Matisse that would prove to be hugely impactful.
There were a number of German expats who were in Paris at the time, and they'd kind of hang out at the same bars, and they'd go to the same exhibitions. You see that influence of Picasso and Matisse and Cézanne very clearly.
In the 1930s, Hofmann moved to the United States, escaping Nazi occupation and World War II. Here, he took the teacher track, ultimately in New York and Provincetown, where Hofmann set up a studio and classroom called The Barn.
In that barn, he taught generations of students for over 20 years. He returned there every summer to teach and also recharge his own artistic practice.
Lydia Gordon is a curator with the Peabody Essex Museum, which is putting the focus on Hofmann as an artist. But it's hard to ignore his impact as a teacher, whose students included some of the most well-known artists of the 20th century, including Louise Nevelson, Helen Frankenthaler, and Robert Motherwell.
Hofmann was inspirational as a teacher because he encouraged that individual creative practice. So it actually didn't matter what the end result looked like, but it was how his students got there, how he got there. And you can really see that in his own paintings that we have in this exhibition. They're really full of movement. It's almost as if he was dancing when creating them.
In Provincetown, Hofmann thrived. He'd tapped into an artist community just like in Europe. And then there was the beauty of Cape Cod.
He goes out, and the landscape outside of his own studio, outside of his window, is very evident in the early landscapes that we have. He's very much using those fauves colors, those purples and those yellows to demonstrate the energy, the spirituality of nature that he's after.
Many of the rules around painting were moving away from a pictorial, photographic image of the world, and how do we delve deeper into the soul of the artist.
Hofmann closed his Provincetown school in 1957 and began painting full-time for the first time in more than 40 years.
It was a total life commitment.
For much of the next decade, until his death in 1966, he was an unrelenting force, says curator Lucinda Barnes.
The experimentation, I think, in his late paintings was more in the way of pushing the boundaries for himself. You see much more use of dark color and ranges of black and velvety greens, and that's not easy to do.
Hofmann famously distilled his method of making into the very simple phrase, push and pull.
He referred to it as expanding and contracting forces, really polar opposites, almost magnetic forces. And with push, you have pull.
If you find some of the concepts challenging, you're in good company. Clement Greenberg, one of the most influential art critics of the mid-century, labeled Hofmann one of the most difficult artists alive, both to grasp and appreciate.
What Greenberg was saying at the time was that Hofmann was very hard to pigeonhole. He was hard to put into one category, and that was intentional on Hoffman's part. He had said if he had one style, he was dead as an artist.
Which is why, even late in the game, Hans Hoffmann never settled.
He always had his paintings around. He said, well, if I can't live with my painting, that painting isn't good enough. And so that was a test for him. He needed to be continually inspired and continue to have conversation with his works.